Good afternoon. She said, I have 1 hour to tell you everything I know about cosmetics, merchandising, and operations. So I'm going to talk, I'll try not to talk too fast. I looked at your questions, and I think a lot of them will be answered. I'm going to try and leave some time at the end. I'll go through and try and answer some of the specific questions you have. And then if I can really have time at the end, we can even ask questions. So won't spend too much time about myself, but I will tell you my name is Rod McFadden. They asked me here because I do have a little bit of experience in the cosmetics industry. I worked my last 10 years of my career at Sephora, where I retired in 2009 to pursue my other interests of theater and playwriting. But for 10 years I was at Sephora, and I was a senior vice president in charge of merchandise operations. So merchandise operations means getting everything into the stores, getting it on fixtures, getting fixtures into the stores, basically making everything get there in time for marketing, in time for, launches, all the things we need, as well as just general inventory management every day, making sure the stores are as full as they could possibly be with inventory, within the budget, of course. And of course, budgeting, doing the financial plans. So it was a wonderful place to work. I learned so much there because we went from, I was going to say from feast to famine. We went from famine to feast at Sephora. When I joined in 2000, the Sephora had been in the US for a little less than 2 years, and it was close to self-destructing. They tried to do too much too fast, even though it was a great concept, and they were having a lot of trouble. So they brought in a number of new people. I was one of them, and as a group, we managed to turn it around, and Sephora went from problem child to the star of LVMH's portfolio, or one of the stars. So that's a little bit about me and my experience and why I'm here. So let's talk about beauty merchandising, and mostly cosmetics and skincare. And Sephora is very different. So I'm going to really talk a little bit more about how its non-Sephora retailers and brands worked, and then we'll bring in the Sephora and we'll kind of see where they contrast and compare. In traditional, when Estee Lauder sort of invented modern cosmetics retailing back in the 1930s, she made it what we at Sephora used to call brand-centric, okay? It was all about the brand. So when you go into a traditional, I'll use the terms traditional for like department stores, or sort of the way that cosmetics has always been sold. That traditional way of doing it, when you go into Macy's, there's counters, right? You see the Chanel counter, you see the Clinique counter, the Lancome counter. Now, thanks to Sephora, they often have benefit counters and philosophy counters and other brands they never would have thought of, but then they kind of came around to see that it wasn't just about 5 or 6 big brands. But even when you go to those brand counters for what I would call the more trendy brands, the newer brands, in a department store, those counters are run by the vendor. Okay, it's a vendor-managed business. So what does that mean compared to most businesses where the retailer buys product, they put it out on the floor, they sort of decide what they want to buy, what they want to sell, how they want to sell it. Cosmetics was set up to be vendor managed. So the woman, what things do you need to manage if you're going to manage your business? What do you need to, what things would you have to set up to start a cosmetics business? Money? What's the money going to pay for? Say? The product, okay. So the product, I'm going to make a list here, because here's a vendor managed. Okay, so there's product, right? Let's take a product. I always use a lipstick. We have a lipstick for our brand, and we're going to retail it. We're going to sell it to the customer for $30. That's how much she pays for it. So as a brand, as a manufacturer, we have to pay for that product, right? We have to pay someone to manufacture it and pour it into a tube and make it look nice and package it. Okay? In the cosmetics industry, that product cost of goods is usually about 15%. Okay? So if I'm going to, of the retail price. So if I'm going to sell something for $30, it probably costs me $4 or $5. I'm going to put 5 just to make it easy. Okay? Now we have the product. What else do I need to pay for to get that product into the customer's hands? Shipping. I'm going to put shipping, it's a good answer. I'm going to kind of roll that into the cost of goods, all right? But shipping would be in there as part of the cost of goods. There might also be, just to digress slightly, there might also be some testing or some formulation tests and things. That all ends up in the product, cost of goods. What about that woman who's standing behind the counter? Salesperson, right? I got to pay for salespeople. So we'll call that staff. And not only do I have to pay her wage, but I also have to train her. I have to teach her about that lipstick, right? She needs to know about it, to speak about it. When Sephora first started, it was something that all the brands criticized us. They said, your people can never know so much. How could they know all those brands, right? I have my woman, she sells only Clinique. She knows Clinique inside and out because they've trained her. So her wages and her training, usually about, just check my notes here, make sure. That's what I thought, I was going to make sure. Usually it's about 10% of the cost, the retail. So there's another $3 I have to pay, all right? Those are probably the two easy ones. What else do I have to pay for? How do I get that customer into my store? How does she know about this wonderful marketing? Okay, good. So marketing, there's two different kinds of marketing in any industry, but particularly in cosmetics. There's institutional marketing. I keep using Lancome, I don't know why, but Lancome puts those ads in the magazines, okay? And they'll probably spend about 10% of their retail sales on that. So there's another $3. Marketing. But there's also marketing. Sometimes Macy's says, well, we have our flyer going here, our weekly 2-day sale thing, or whatever they're doing. They have a 2-day sale every week with those coupons. Never buy anything without one of those coupons. And so sometimes Macy's will say, well, can you help pay for some of that? Can you cooperate with us? So they call it co-op advertising. And that might add up to another $1 or $2 that Lancome will pay. They'll say, okay, Macy's, we'll pay for part of your ad. You pay for half, we'll pay for half. Right? What else? Where do we put that lipstick when we're in the store? There's a case, right, and it's got like some little risers or little velvet cushions or things, however they decide to do it. So there's fixturing, right? I can't just put the lipstick on the floor. I got to buy some fixtures. And fixturing, I'll double check my notes, that's what I thought. Probably, that's a percentage. That's another, I'm going to say $2. It's about 5%. Okay? So I'll just remind us here. This was like 15%, 10%. This is about 15% together, and this is maybe 5%. Sorry, my writing's pretty bad. Okay? Did that? Those are the biggies, things I have to pay for. What else do I have to pay for specifically in cosmetics, in the beauty industry? What other things? Think about when you shop. What happens? What's the experience like? You ever buy a lipstick without seeing how it looks on your, you rub it on your hand, or testers, right? Okay, so testers, you got to pay for testers, right? Someone's got to pay for them. So there's testers. Sometimes you're not in the store, or you're not testing it out right in the store, but like as you're buying something, you put some samples in your bag, right? So there's sampling. Sampling is sort of part of marketing, but it's its own very specialized version. And then there's one that is internal in the industry for the people who work in the industry. Anyone hear about this, where the brands give product to people who work in the industry? Gratis, that's right. I always thought that when I started working in the cosmetics industry, I thought that was very cool that they talk Latin. So gratis, Latin for free. They give it to the salespeople so that they can honestly tell their customers, oh yeah, I use that. They don't tell them they got it for free, but they tell them they use it. Okay? And these other things are probably another 5%. So that's another $1 or $2, all right? There's other thing that falls into here, which is just sort of like damages and things like that, write-offs, and things get broken and they have to throw them away and that sort of thing. All right, so what do we have here? Boom, boom, boom. We're selling this thing for $30. I'm sorry to jump into all this math right off the bat, but I thought, well, it's going to list all the sort of things I'm going to talk about, so we might as well see how we pay for it right up front, okay? 15%, 25%, 40%, 45%, roughly 50% of what I sold it for, I, as the brand, had to pay, right? Does that make sense, everyone? So I've paid out of my pocket about $15 so far. There's one other thing, I as a brand. Now, does that mean I make $15 as a brand? Well, there's one other player here. We were in Macy's, I think we were. So Macy's has to make some money. Macy's sold this thing. Even though they weren't managing the business, the brand was doing all this, hiring the staff, training them, paying for the marketing, paying for the fixturing. But Macy's says, well, we're giving you prime real estate, first floor, right in the door. We need money for this. So Macy's agreement with them is that we get 40% of the retail. Anyone know the term for that? What would Macy's call that 40%? That's what Macy's would call their gross margin, okay? Anyone heard the term gross margin before? When you take the financial planning class, you'll get real familiar with gross margin. Gross margin means the money that you make on the retail sale, okay? So Macy's rings it through their cash register for $30. Macy's hasn't actually spent any of this money, right? The brand spent all that money. So Macy's is spending money on other things. They're spending money on their people running the manager of the store and their own marketing and their rent for how much they pay the mall to be there, all those things. But Macy's says, we want to make 40% on that. All right? So Macy's makes $12, 40% of 30. And basically, that leaves for Lancome, out of that $30, they gave Macy's 12, they spent 15, they get $3, 10%. I'm kind of going sideways here. All right, which would be we've had 50% in expenses, 40%. That left them 10%. So they put that lipstick out, they managed to do all those things, sold it for $30, and they got $3 back. Okay, doesn't sound like a lot, but if you sell enough lipsticks, it can add up, right? That's traditional cosmetics, vendor-managed math. Okay? Questions on that? Does it make sense? Sort of follow along? I'm oversimplified, obviously, but that's basically what happens. Lancome comes out with this for $30. They expect to make $3 on it. And they know they're going to have to pay for this. They're going to have to give this money to Macy's. Macy's loves it because Macy's doesn't have to do a whole lot, right? And the vendor loves it because they get to control the whole thing. They're in charge of their own business. 1998, Sephora comes to the US. So enter Sephora. Sephora, someone asked the question here, what inspired Sephora? I think somebody asked something, what inspired them to sell like they do? Sephora was set up to be not brand-centric, but to be customer-centric. We call our customers clients, so I'll probably call them clients. We had a particular value, passion for the client, and it meant every decision, we tried to live by this, you can't always, but every decision we made at Sephora was with the client in best interest in mind. How would she do it? So let's look at what Sephora does differently. Sephora doesn't have cases, right, with the stuff under glass. It has it all out there open. It's called open sell, because we said, you know what, women probably don't really like to stand on one side of a case and have someone take out things from drawers, not even telling you how much they are, and start to convince you you should buy them. You know, so Sephora put the prices out, they put everything out front, and you could, we called it freedom to play. You could test the product, you could play with the product, okay? The women working, well, mostly women, the salespeople working at Sephora, unlike the traditional staff here, if Lancome is paying for this staff, do they want her to suggest the new Dior Show mascara to her customer? No. They don't want her to sell anything but Lancome. And they incent her to do that by paying her a commission. She doesn't get paid a whole lot, but if she sells something, that's where most of this 10% comes from. Her salary is tiny, but she gets money every time she sells that lipstick. So she's going to want to sell Lancome. Sephora said, well, you know, sometimes you got a good Lancome lipstick, but you want to put a different blush with it from Stila and a mascara from Dior or whatever it could be. So how would a client want it to be? Well, a client doesn't want to have to go to 6 different salespeople. They would want one salesperson who could take them around the store and show them what they needed, what they wanted. Customer-centric, okay? So Sephora changed the idea of fixturing. Now the fixturing, we call them gondolas. I don't know why I was like that term. The gondola was that big fixture that's about 9 feet long that sits in a Sephora store. And then they came up with shorter ones and different kind of things. But they changed the fixturing. They changed the staffing. We said to the brands, no, you don't have to provide us any staff. We will pay for our own staffing because we want to tell our staff how to service our customers. And we will tell them to sell them anything that they want. Okay, so let's remember, this sort of, at Sephora, didn't need that from the brand. The brand didn't have to pay for that anymore. We also said to the brand, we don't do market, we're not going to charge you any marketing. We don't do marketing. You know, we don't do brand-specific marketing. So when Sephora started, they would market Sephora, but they would not put out an ad saying, here's this new Stila lip glaze, come get this at Sephora. So we said, you can still do your own marketing brand, but we don't need the co-op. Okay? Co-op, Not going to need it from you. We didn't want them, we didn't have sampling. We told them we would pay for our own testers. We would take a product and write it off when we needed a tester. We would mark it out of stock and put it in the tester panel. We did ask them for fixturing, okay? So, Sephora's told these brands, we're going to do it differently. Here's 10%, and between this co-op marketing and this, there was about another, we told them there was about 20% of all these costs that they were paying to Macy's, they didn't have to pay Sephora. If you were a brand, would you like that? So Sephora said, but 40%. 40%'s for suckers. I mean, for Macy's. 40%, not enough. We just gave you 20% back. So we want 55%. We have to make 55% gross margin because we have to pay for some things that Macy's doesn't. Okay? And if you're following the math there, that's still pretty good for the brand because we gave them back 20% and we only asked for 15 more. And most of the brands said, that's good. Okay, we'll give you a try. But the brands lose something in this deal that they had in the original brand managed scenario. They lose the ability to control their business, right? Certainly not to run it from A to Z. Now, any good business in any category, the retailer and the brand are going to be partners. They're going to work together in ways and try and make sure that they're doing what both feel are best for the business. But the shift here went from really being brand-centric to now the brands didn't have a lot of say in how things happened at Sephora. And for that reason, even though we were offering them maybe potentially 5% more on their bottom line, and remember, their bottom line was only 10%. So if you give them 5% more, that's almost half again as much as they were making. 5% doesn't sound like much, but when your bottom line is 10, 5's pretty good. But some brands like Clinique or Chanel, they said, no, our brand image is too important to us. How the customer experiences our product is too important to us for 5%. So they wouldn't come into Sephora in the beginning. They looked at us and they said, you guys go have a good time. You're going to lose. It will never work, was basically what they said. And after about 18 months, everyone thought they were right because, as I mentioned, by about 2000, Sephora was like in a death spiral. We were losing about $3 for every dollar we sold. So for every $30 we had here, we had $90 worth of costs and expenses happening. It was not... But that wasn't because the idea of customer-centric cosmetics retailing was bad. It wasn't because the concept of Sephora or the product was bad. It was just we hadn't really figured out how to make it work. And we started running as fast as we could when usually when you start a business, you should maybe go a little more slowly. I think people were a little confident, overconfident when they first started Sephora that it would just happen. And business is always harder than you think it's going to be. Okay, so that's a little bit of the difference between Sephora merchandising versus traditional cosmetics merchandising. And this is pretty much to say, I haven't separated out beauty, color product, makeup. We called it color as a category at Sephora. So if I call something color, I'm talking about makeup versus skincare. Same situation. You know, but in skincare, there were a lot more smaller brands that were easy to find. And so skincare grew up at Sephora first more quickly. Then we began to find smaller makeup brands. So in a way, it was good that Clinique and Chanel and Lancome and Prescriptives and all these big brands that we were trying to duplicate what the department stores had. In a way, it was a godsend that they all said no to Sephora, because even though it made our lives really difficult at first, it forced us to find brands like Urban Decay or Stila or Benefit. Benefit was two ladies in their garage in San Francisco making makeup when Sephora knocked on their door in 1999. Okay, so Sephora had to find brands because we couldn't get the brands that were in the department store. And then we discovered there were a lot of brands who were knocking on the department store doors, small brands, and the department stores were saying, no, we have our model. If you want to come into our department store, you have to pay for the staff, you have to pay for the fixtures, you have to pay for marketing. And these two women in their garage were like, we just make makeup, you know, we love makeup. And we're really creative, but we don't know how to do all that. So suddenly you have this magic thing happen where brands that couldn't get into the department store had Sephora, and Sephora couldn't get the brands in the department store, but we found these other brands. And we grew up together, and 15 years later, I haven't been there for 6 years, so I can only take credit for the first 10 years at Sephora, but 15 years later, Sephora's well over a $3 billion company in the US, and they're probably by now, they must be more than 15%, maybe 20% of the total makeup market in the US, prestige makeup market. When I was there, we used to track that every month, and we watch ourselves go up from like 1% to 2%, 4%, 6%. That's how we knew we were doing good, doing well, because not only was our business getting better, but we were taking market share. We were converting women who had always shopped in a traditional way and making them understand they could shop for makeup in a different way, and skincare, okay? So that's point one. No, that's a little bit of everything here. That's a little bit. We've talked a lot about costing here. We've talked about some gross margin, things like that. But I'm gonna try and pull it together a little bit. Some things that are important in the cosmetics industry. If you are a traditional cosmetics manufacturer and you put out your ads in the magazines, you're showing new product or you're showing image, maybe they're only showing image, sometimes they don't show any product, they just want to give you a sense of you'll be a better person if you use this makeup. It's very important, and if you come into a traditional environment where every counter, that woman only wants to sell her own product, she doesn't want to sell anything else. The term that came up often in meetings with vendors was space, two terms, space and location. But I call it one term because it was always like, it's like one word, if you could spell that as one word. Space and location. It's what they all wanted. They wanted to have the best space because they wanted that customer to hit their counter first, because as soon as she hit another counter, they knew it was a good chance that woman behind the counter would never let her leave until she bought something. She was on commission, it was her livelihood, so they all wanted the best space they could get, or the best location, sorry. And space, they wanted a lot of space. This goes to, but at Sephora, well, you can shop wherever you want. In fact, someone's not really even helping you unless you want them to help you, so you can wander around. So where you were in the store was not so important as it was in a traditional environment. Yes, there were still spaces or spots where you thought this is a better location to be in, you know, but it wasn't so critical because either you could wander around on your own, or if you happen to mention something, whatever salesperson you were with would take you to it and find it, which didn't happen in the traditional environment. So location was sort of nullified as something at Sephora. Though when we began to get traditional brands starting to say, well, you know, this Sephora thing isn't going away. We need to be part of it. In fact, it's getting bigger. And now if you go into Sephora, they often have Clinique, or they don't have Chanel anymore. We finally just, maybe they got it back, I don't know. We kicked them out at one point because we just couldn't deal with them. But because when they came in, they said, no, we will only come into this particular store. We will be in the store in Burlingame, but we will not be in the store in Walnut Creek. We will be in this store, and we will only be in the store in Burlingame if you give us these 3 wall units on the left side of the, I mean, when Sephora is running a store with 200 brands in it, they just don't have time to deal with these brands asking for specific locations and things. So it was very difficult for us to deal with this idea of space and location, and we didn't. But that meant we didn't get these traditional brands because that was all they cared about. They always wanted to have space and location. And it still exists to some extent. You know, if you walk through a Macy's selling floor, next time you go through the selling floor, look around and try and decide where you think the best counter is there. If you had a brand, where would you put your counter? And you better believe that those brands, if you pick the right one, those brands fight tooth and nail for that. And every now and then, once a year, you might see that, wow, they flipped where Chanel was versus where Dior was. Somebody went to the mat to make that flip happen because they believed that was a better location. Okay. All right, so space and location, very important. Space, the amount of space you have, as opposed to location, where you are in the store. I'm sorry, I've been kind of interchanging those, but that's because I'm out of practice on this, I guess. The amount of space you have, what does that dictate? What does space give you? If you have more space, what can you do with it? Put more products out, right? So the more space you get, the more stuff you can have. And the more stuff you have, the more possibility you'll be able to sell something, right? At Sephora, the fixtures have like little slots. The little, we call them pushers. And the little slots, most of them, and you can put, there's a little slot for every item, right? You can only put so many items on there. If you have a case with lots of drawers underneath, a case like in a traditional cosmetics area, you can put as many items in those drawers as you want, because the brands were not requiring that the people there put every item out. They'd say, well, put out a few of that lipstick, and if anyone asks, you can tell them, oh, I have 30 more colors here in the drawer, and if you said, well, let me see the reds, they'll take out 6 or 7 red lipsticks and let you pick from them. But you couldn't do that at Sephora because you'd need 6 or 7 slots. And it's like, who really wants those last 5 shades of lipstick? So because space was limited, more limited in Sephora, it forced the assortments to be tighter. It forced what we call assortment editing, right? Which wasn't necessary. When this brand is paying for all this stuff, and Macy's doesn't really care, they're going to get their 40%. So they put, maybe if you dug through the Clinique assortment at a typical Macy's, there might be 600 different SKUs, stock keeping units, SKU, an item, 600. One of those 9-foot gondolas in a Sephora maybe holds 200 items. So all of a sudden, it's like I can't have 7 different colors of lipstick. Give me the best 2. Which are going to be the best 2? And if the brand says, well, they're all good, then the merchant at Sephora will say, no, okay, well, you don't know. I'm going to pick these 2. And the brand will go, oh, they're serious. All right, no, it's that one and this one. Those are the best two, because they know, but they want to sell more. So because space was limited, it forced this idea of editing assortments, which was not really common in the cosmetics industry because they didn't need to do it. And so Sephora set up stores which had many, many brands, but within the brands they had tighter assortments than you would find. So compare, contrast traditional cosmetics retailing, limited number of brands with very wide assortments. Sephora said no. Customer doesn't really want to see every single nth color of lipstick. She wants to see a lot of different brands, a lot of different aesthetic philosophies that these founders of brands bring in. So let's give her lots of brands and we'll keep the assortment tighter. Okay? That make sense? Sales planning becomes easier when you have an edited assortment because you have less items to plan, right? So part of the edited assortment was necessary for Sephora because when vendors are managing it, they're also doing sales forecasting. They're deciding how much they're going to sell and they're buying inventory to those levels. So, okay, so I got 800. They don't worry that they have like a bunch of SKUs that they figure, well, we'll just buy one of those and we won't worry too much about it. But at Sephora, you couldn't just buy one of things because it wouldn't look good it was out for everyone to see. So you had to be a little more practical about, and if you sold it, now you had that empty slot in the gondola, which when I was managing inventory there, worst thing. It looks so bad, right? And everybody thinks they're out of stock of everything because there's slots open. So we'd have fewer items to forecast, and so we would do our sales forecasting ourselves. So again, something else the vendor didn't have to do. You'd think they'd be happy about that. But vendors, if they're not sales forecasting, they're not writing the orders, and then they feel like maybe you're not ordering enough or whatever. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. But let's talk a little bit about sales forecasting. How would you forecast? We've got this new item, $30 lipstick. What are some things that would tell us, well, how's it going to sell? Where would we start? Previous sales, okay. But this is a new item, so we don't have any sales on this yet. But it's not the first lipstick we've ever sold, right? That's what you're thinking about. So we could look at another lipstick, maybe another Lancome lipstick that we think is similar, or maybe it's from another brand. The brands, when they're managing, they don't have that opportunity. They can only look at other Lancome lipsticks. But we could look at all the different brands. We could say, what's the closest thing to this $30 lipstick that we have already, and how's it selling? So you do it by like item, and you have this rate of sale for a similar item, okay? What else influences sales? What would make sales go up or down? Yeah? Seasonality, good. Yeah, you have seasonality, right? So, yeah, maybe I sell 4 of these every week in March, but Mother's Day is coming up. So you got to think, okay, what does Mother's Day mean to my sales trend? Christmas, you know. We always had a huge month in August at Sephora. It was the 3rd biggest month of the year. And we were like, why does this happen? But we couldn't quite figure out why would August be so big, but we really finally realized that, you know, we had a huge younger clientele, and so we kind of had a back to school business. Before they would get ready to go back to school, they would clean out their makeup case or get their, you know, and so August was always a pretty big month for us. one other digression, just sort of we always thought, okay, Valentine's Day, that's got to be a huge, huge thing for Sephora. 99.4% of customers at Sephora are women. Valentine's Day must be huge. We're going to be like right behind See's Candy in terms of selling stuff at Valentine's Day. Nope. It's one thing about business and sales forecasting. You're always right until you're wrong, okay? The best thing you can do is guess. And sometimes, but the worst thing you can do is guess, be wrong, and then not change your idea, right? If we kept doing that year after year, that would not be a good thing. But it's okay to guess and be wrong once. There was one category at Sephora that always sold much better at Valentine's Day. Anyone know what that could be? More specific? That's what we thought it would be. We thought it would be perfume. But it was more like cologne. It was men's side. And suddenly, someone was like, well, duh, we have 99% of our customers are women and they're buying a Valentine's gift. It's a men's cologne. Okay, we finally figured that out. We weren't that smart at Sephora, but anyway. But a good example of seasonality, all right? So seasonality, and the third one is marketing, okay? Marketing drives sales. So I'm selling a certain amount, right, every month, and then we have an ad on it, we have a catalog, or we have, do an email blast through Sephora.com about this item, boom, it jumps up. So in doing sales forecasts, you got to look for sort of a baseline that you get usually from a like item, from some sales history that you have. And then you apply some seasonality to it, which again, you usually get from history. And seasonality is easier to get from history because it's like a big group of products. All lipsticks sell with this sales curve. And so this is a lipstick, so I'll apply that sales curve. But then, do I have specific marketing happening that I can anticipate for this? And then I put that into the sales forecast also. Now there's one other kind of market attached to marketing that you can't always anticipate, which is we call PR, or editorial things. So at the time, I was around 2005, 2006, Oprah Winfrey mentioned philosophy, cinnamon buns, shower gel on her show. We were about the only people carrying philosophy at the time, Sephora and QVC. Oh my, crazy. So we started to call things the Oprah effect. If she mentioned something, it went crazy, like hundreds of times. We were selling like 100 a week, and suddenly we want to sell 5,000 or something. Sometimes those things are hard to predict because you can't tell Oprah, okay, on this day I want you to mention cinnamon bun shower gel. She's like, leave me alone. I talk about what I want to talk about. So you just hope she talks about your thing, and you hope you get any kind of idea she's going to do it in advance. But that's the extreme. But there's always, every magazine you look through, you see, oh, they're talking about this product, and there's that little tag that says available on Sephora.com. So you start to learn which magazines impact your business more than others. Sephora's client was most influenced by Lucky, Allure, right? If we got a tag in Elle or Vogue, it wasn't as strong, But when the Allure Beauty Awards came out, in every, we would look at it real quickly and we'd buy a bunch of the stuff. So it depends what your customer is most in tune with. What's she reading? Which magazine does she attach herself to? Of course, we had customers who read Elle and Vogue, and we had customers, but not as many, right? Okay? Let me see, what else did I want to talk to you guys about? We kind of talked about costs, gross margin. Here's one more thing I'll talk to you about. It has to do a little bit with assortment planning, and then I'll look at your questions. is the beauty industry a fashion business? How many people say yes, fashion? Okay, I see a few hands. Okay, it's certainly a fashionable business, right? It's dictated by style, it's dictated by trends, celebrity, impact, things like that. So, but if we think of the terms, what's the opposite of fashion in merchandising and retailing? There's fashion and there's basic, right? And there's seasonals, another category you'd have, right? So if you say, well, for something to be a fashion business, it has to be fashion driven, which means usually product comes in and I sell out in a limited amount of time and I bring in new product, right? So if you've taken, like most ready to wear season, is fashion driven. I have my collection, it comes in for the spring, I have 13 weeks to sell it, and now I have my summer collection come in, right? I learned it fairly quickly. It became quite obvious, but I was very surprised when I got into the cosmetics business that it was a very basic business at heart. The product did not change, did not have an expiration date, well, literally had an expiration date on some skincare products, but from a fashion versus basic point of view, it wasn't like I'm going to bring in these products and I have to get rid of them in 13 weeks. Most of the products at Sephora would have life cycles of a couple years or maybe more, okay? So it sort of surprised me that I discovered, gee, cosmetics is a really basic business. I reorder the same products every month. It's like underwear or, milk at the store or whatever. It's very basic. So even though it looks very fashionable, it's important to understand that the beauty business is truly pretty much basic. We had 12,000 different items at Sephora, 12,000, more or less. Any given store, we don't put them all in every store, so any store that you happen to go into, if you go into the Powell Street store at the other end of the cable car turnaround, they probably have all 12,000. That's a big store, but if you went over to Walnut Creek or down to Burlingame, you might see 6,000 items, okay? But my point about fashion versus basic, 12,000 items, we had about 2,000 new items every year. So 10,000, and of course to have 2,000 new items, we have limited space, remember, so we have to get rid of 2,000 items. 2,000 in, 2,000 out. But 10,000 of them just kept going. Okay, I'll buy those ones again. I don't have to change them. They're really like basic items, even though they might be very colorful, very trendy, very hip. We treated them as if they were basic items, right? Does that make sense to everyone? And if you think about it, you say, yeah, I've been looking at that NARS, our best-selling blush from NARS on day one with NARS is a blush called NARS Orgasm. When I left 10 years later, NARS Orgasm was still the #1 selling blush in the assortment. So 10 years. People could never figure out why. We figured it was just the name, but anyway, they bought it. So not 2,000 out of 12,000 is about 15%. So 15% of the assortment changes every year, and 85% of it stays the same. That's pretty much a basic business. Let's just talk about that change because it's important to think about. How do you do that? How do you get rid of those 2,000 items that you have to get rid of? We had to do about 200 of them every month. Had to get rid of some 200 because 200 new ones are coming in. How do you do that in a fashion business? How do they get rid of excess fashion goods they want to get rid of? Promotion, discount, sales, right? We love them. If you're buying ready to wear, you love when the buyers make mistakes. So this is where you have an agreement with the vendors, the brands, that you will send product back to them, right? They want to put their new product on. The brands are all saying, we have all these new products. You say, well, we have limited amount of space. We have to pick out the ones that are selling worst or that don't fit anymore into the vision of the brand. And we'll send them back to you. So return to vendor is pretty much the standard that is done in the cosmetics industry to avoid creating a discount mentality. You know, how many of you can admit it, how many of you wait for things, fashion, ready to wear, wait to buy it until you start to see those sale signs go up? Okay, you look, you go, whoa, this rack is full. I'm not going to buy it right now. You kind of wait till it's down to the last one. Okay, I got to buy it. But we know it will go down. We know they will reduce the price. The cosmetics industry has been pretty good about avoiding creating that thinking in their customers because they don't allow it to be marked down. They RTV it, and then once it's returned to the vendor, which is a labor-intensive process. Every store has to pack up these items, put them in a box, send them to a warehouse. Warehouse has to put all the boxes together and then send it back to the brand. And the brand has to take it all apart and count and make sure we sent them what we said we sent them. Okay? But after it gets there, what does the brand do with it, you think? Promotion. Well, so they might sell it, but if they went and sold it, they couldn't sell it. They just took it back from people who were selling it, right? So what they might do is ship it to a different country where they have a lower profile and sell it at a discount, okay? What else but if they can't do that, say they don't want to do that, you know what they do? They destroy it. They throw it away. So one more story. I know I'm running out of time, but this is just a funny story that struck me when I was at Sephora. Sephora was owned by LVMH, and it's connected to RTVs. Sephora is owned by LVMH. Dior is also owned by LVMH, right? So I would meet with, sometimes when we would have a meeting with Dior, we could talk very openly because we shared information. We were all part of the same corporation. I mean, ultimately, the money that Sephora was making, we were sending to Bernard Arnault, who owned LVMH, and Dior was making money, and they were sending it to Bernard Arnault. So, didn't matter which one of us made money, Bernard Arnault got it. So I was at dinner with someone from Dior, and we were talking about RTVs, and I said, well, what do you do with the stuff after we send it back to you? And he said, I said, do you sell it? You sell it in South America? And he's like, no, we destroy it. And I was like, so I spend all this money to have my stores pack it up, send it to my warehouse, who repacks it, who then ships it to you, and I've spent all that money, and then you spend money to open it up, count it all, make sure I shipped you what I said I shipped you, and then you destroy it. I said, you know, if you just let me destroy it, we would both save a lot of money and Mr. Arnault would make more money from both of us. And anyway, make a long story short, that's what ended up happening with us in Dior at some point. We just said, well, we're not going to ship it up. We will write it off, and we told Dior how much the write-off was, and they paid us for that. But they trusted us in that way. That's a little odd in a way that, you know, your brand would trust you that far to basically just say, you know what? We wrote off $7,000 this month, you have to give it to us. But we were part of the same umbrella company, and ultimately it did work out better. We both ended up making more money for trusting each other and not doing something dumb like shipping product halfway around the world to be thrown away. Anyway, I'm almost out of time. This always goes so quick. I hope I covered a few things that are helpful. Let me look at some of the questions you guys did and see if I answered them. I think I kind of discussed this profit and retail pricing structure. I mean, basically, one thing I didn't tell you about was that over time, 55% was not enough for Sephora. Sephora got bigger and bigger, and so we kept saying, well, we need a little bit more. We need 58% now, and we need 60%. And from new brands coming in, we already had established business. And remember the story in the beginning, any brand we can get, come into Sephora. We'll take you from your garage. Well, once our stores were full and we had a lot of successful brands, now for a brand to come in, we had to get rid of an entire brand. The same way if you want to put new products within your own brand fixture, you got to get rid of products. Well, if a new brand comes in, you have to get rid of an entire brand. So we had to feel really good about a new brand coming in. And new brands, we would ask them for some of them 60 to 65%. Just to come in, but they knew they would get the right amount of exposure. They knew it could be a launching pad. And so Sephora started to get a lot higher margin. I think right now their overall margin's about 62% across all their products. So that's 7% better than they started, which is part of the reason they were making money and not losing money. The other thing that Sephora did as they got bigger and bigger was they did start to have a catalog and ask for co-op advertising. So brands began to pay this. They did start to ask for trainings. We said, you know, you'll be better. Our people will understand your product better if you train them. And so the brand said, but you said you weren't going to do training. We said, well, you don't have to do it, but, you know, Stila's doing it. And then Benefit said, well, I better do it too. So over time, it wasn't planned. It wasn't like Sephora thought, oh, after we get this, we're going to start loading it all back in. But Sephora got successful enough that it just sort of happened naturally. And now brands give us testers, they give us samples, they give us co-op, they give us training. They basically do all of this. They have to, and they still give us a higher margin. So does a brand make less money at Sephora than they do at the traditional retailer? They probably do now, but the amount of business that Sephora is generating that is incremental, because it's mostly business, a lot of our business came from new customers who weren't shopping in the department store, they were shopping in drugstore cosmetics, which these brands were not getting their piece of. So it did work out for everybody. You know, you can't have a business partnership where it's not good, at least for everybody. But it ended up being really good for Sephora in the long run. Let me see what other questions I have here. I think I answered all those. What inspired you to create a new cosmetic shopping system? It was really about how does a customer want to shop? Everything about it. She doesn't want commission sales. She wants to play and experiment. She wants to mix brands. So everything we did there. And someone said, where did you get the name Sephora? Sephora, actually, a guy made up the word. A guy who founded Sephora in France in 1976. It was a French company, and it was in Europe for a long time before it came to the US. He took the word for the goddess of beauty, Sephos, and this one's really obscure, but Moses' wife in the Bible was said to be the most beautiful woman in the world, and her name was Zipporah. He took Sephos and Zipporah, and he made Sephora. True story. You know, clearly he thought up the Sephora concept, so the guy was a creative, visionary kind of guy, so you kind of expect him to be like finding all these obscure references to make a name. The name was not an easy thing to deal with when Sephora came to the US. No one knew what it meant. No one could say it. It was, let's see, whoops, did I just pull this off? Sorry. If someone mentioned managing inventory at holiday season on a question, it's a good question. That's where you've got a true fashion business happening at Sephora. I mean, those items come in November, and we want to be done with them at January 1st or December 26th. So Sephora every year would make about 200 gift items, we called them. We'd work with the brands to make their own special sets or whatever, but then we would manage that the exact same way you would manage seasonal fashion business. It would have a sales plan for every item for all 8 weeks of the Christmas season, the holiday season, and we would track it, and you look and you watch it. Did that one sell more or less than I thought it would in week 1? And if it sells less, you got to say, do I change anything yet? Usually no one changes in week 1, but if week 2 it still sells less, or week 3 it sells less, now you got to say, wait, it's priced too high, or something. Customer's not responding to it. I have to. All you can do at that point is change the price, right? So you'd call up the brand, say, you know what? Our $30 gift set is not selling. We only sold 10% of what we thought we'd sell. I think it'll really sell through if it's $20. And the brand and you can work that out, and they will pay a little bit of money to help offset the loss you'll get by marking it down. And of course, if it's selling faster, great. Maybe you can get more, but usually you can't get any more, and you just hope that after that sells out, you start selling the ones that you couldn't sell. But we do that, and then at some point, you definitely take a markdown on everything, and certainly after Christmas, take a markdown and get rid of it, okay? How long should a product stay on the market if the sales are not as forecasted? Well, as I said, if it's sort of a basic item, something you brought in and you were thinking it might be on that gondola for 2 years, you have to look at it pretty carefully, and certainly we would change assortments maybe 4 times a year for any given brand, and so we would look quickly. We wouldn't give it too much time. It might go through 1 quarter, and then we'd say, all right, it's kind of on the chopping block, and if it didn't pick up the next quarter, it would be one of those 2,000 items that gets RTV'd. How did the 2007-2008 financial crisis affect Sephora? Interesting, almost affected me because that was my final year there, and I was thinking, what a time to retire. But Sephora grew up when we turned the company around in 2000 and 2001. We really got very tight with all our controls. We said, you know what, we have to always be planning for the worst, because this company almost went out of business. We pulled it out of the fire, and now we always have to be ready, you know. So even though our business got better and better, the culture there was very cautious isn't the right word, because we always tried new things, but where we could control inventories, where we could control expenses without impacting the customer experience, we did everything to do that. So when this crisis happened, changing gears, shifting gears was not as hard for us. Even more so when 9/11 happened in 2001, it was the same thing. Sephora, everyone reacted to this sort of economic slump, but it didn't impact Sephora so much because we had been through really tough times already. We had created them for ourselves in the beginning of the company, and we kind of knew how to deal with it. So let me see, 1 or 2 more, and then I've got to run. I apologize, but I have one other thing I have to do at 6 o'clock. Carrying many different brands with many different products, how difficult is it to manage inventory? I was a main inventory management manager for most of my time there. Really difficult. You've got 2 teams in most retail concepts now, and it's no different with Sephora. A merchant team who are working with the brands and sort of assorting the product, and a planning team who are deciding how much of every item to buy and doing the financial budgeting. And so the planners are always pushing back on the merchants to say, look at, you need to get your items need to be more productive. This, we did it based on, remember, space is limited. So we used to run a report that would say the space productivity. This gondola is only making 78% of what a typical gondola would make. And that would push the merchants to then push the vendors that we need better items, we need more sales. The better selling all the items are, the easier they are to forecast. You can imagine if an item only sells one every 4 months, you know, if you're saying, well, how many will I sell in a year? Well, 3. And we had a lot of items where that was true. But which months will those 3 sell? Very hard to predict, right? So, but if you have something that sells 200 every week, okay, now we can do that whole seasonality curve like we were talking about very easily. So some items really easy to predict. The slower sellers, the things that sort of fill it out and make it all look wonderful, those are the tough ones. Okay, good question. Financial planning done before the products have been produced or done after. Sometimes, usually before, but oftentimes it could happen after. Brands would make a product and then we would decide what we wanted to buy. But when we were doing private label and things like that, you're always trying to figure out how much you're going to sell before you even make it. And that's, as I said, it's always a guess, but you keep getting better and better at your guesses the more of them you make. Last one. Did I have to go to school to work in my field? I did go to school, but I don't know if it helped me work in my field or not, I'll be honest with you. I was an English literature major when I was in college. But I think school does help you. My schooling helped me be a good critical thinker, I think, and to put up with a lot of, you know, get some discipline. And I think that's really important if you work particularly at some place like Sephora, where they're always challenging you with new ideas, new ways of selling product, that sort of thing. So I didn't actually study financial planning and things in school, but I was always a really kind of a math geek, so I guess it came naturally to me. All right, I thank you for listening.